taking action for you this morning on TV 20 Detroit starts right now.
Pulse of a new generation.
Feel the good vibe and, the Greg Dunmore vibe. This is more than a show. That's why the name of it is the Greg Dunmore vibe, and it's really about a great vibe. And I have joining me, calling from New York, Mr. Lee Hawkins, who's also an award-winning NABJ award-winning journalist. He is a Pulitzer Prize finalist for what he did reporting for or on the Tulsa Massacre. He has had a career that has just been international because of the Wall Street Journal. He is the CEO of Lee Hawkins Productions, and he is soon to be, I'm going to say, an award-winning author. Just let the audience know, just in a sentence, just let them know why the National Association of Black Journalists and the awards that you have for from that just remarkable group of journalists. Why is this an award that would have no equal?
Just because it's an award from your peers, a black journalist, and every year we get together in fellowship. And for me, it's really a meditational and really reflective time because it brings the best and brightest journalists from all over America to one city, and it brings the black people together, and it just gives us an opportunity to compare notes. I know that earlier in my career, I established relationships with a lot of mentors, and what they really do for you is they help you work through a lot of the things that really can't be taught, like the corporate politics and how to follow through stories to the end, and all of those things that you might not otherwise get if you're, one of the few black people in a newsroom. Yes. So a lot of times it's good just to have that support network.
So to be honored by your own is something that is priceless. It gives you a spiritual vibe like none other. Now, I told you that I was friends with attorney Kimberly Crenshaw. She and I, we went to Cornell at the same time, and she is one of the people that came up with the critical race theory. And when I talked to you, you told me that you also have something that I think will become part of a bigger picture of discussion. And you told me it's a phrase and it's an ideology that needs to be discussed, and you entitled it "The War on Black Excellence." Can you tell this audience the war on black excellence would mean what?
Well, okay, so I am a journalist, but I also call myself a mental abolitionist and a soldier for black excellence, and what I call the war against black excellence. And what that is it's a centuries-long war. That is it started during slavery in America, and there were rules that were established that black people had to follow. We couldn't read or write by law. There were lashes involved if black people were caught reading or writing. There was incarceration. There was punishment. We couldn't wear clothes up to a certain value. Like, there were all kinds of restrictions on us. And I believe that a lot of us have internalized those racist stereotypes in modern times to believe, for instance, that, a black person speaking a certain way qualifies them as acting white as opposed to just speaking professional language, or a black person being educated is a problem. I've seen it happen to Russell Wilson, the football player, where people have called him corny because, he's always talking about his wife and his children. And, that goes all the way back to slavery, with the idea that our families were pulled apart and they didn't want our black men to be loving their families and to be even with their families. So they were sold away. And so I think that these modern manifestations of centuries-long racial tropes and stereotypes has started what we need to wage a war against, this idea of black people actually being white supremacists.
Yeah, you know what,
I mean that white supremacists come in all shade, and I just want to finish this because it's so critical to say this last thing. there are two things that are happening right now in this country that need our attention. One is that the Supreme Court is about to overturn affirmative action in college admission, so that may happen. And two, there's a black man running for president right now who's saying systematic racism doesn't exist. And I want to say at the outset that I'm neither a Democrat or a Republican. I'm a journalist, but I'm passionate, if not self-righteous, about the idea of black Americans being mentally free to define themselves and be their authentic selves based on their dreams, their aspirations, and their whole being. And we are in a war for the minds of our children and the hearts of our children. And they have to know that being black does not mean that you have to be in poverty to be black, that you have to be uneducated to be black. If you happen to be in poverty and you happen to be black, those are two separate things. They're not part of the black identity.
And sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, Lee, and sometimes we can be our own worst enemies. I call it a dysfunctional, D-I-S-R-E-S-P-E-C-T, a dysfunctional disrespect. Now, you know, there was a point that you made that ties into something that just happened. Hill Harper, the actor who was a Harvard-trained attorney, he was brilliant in his oratory as he addressed a group of community people at Wayne County Community College District, which is in the heart and soul of downtown Detroit, in a series called Global Conversations. And it was in salute of Harry Belafonte, and he was being interviewed by someone on this station, Bankerley Thompson. And I wrote something about his speech and the conversation, and I thought he was brilliant. And then I get this message that was, to me, it was an attack not only on Hill Harper, but it was an attack on me as well because of what I wrote in glowing terms about what Hill Harper I felt was so worthy of being respected. And I get this message, not even qualified. Here's the thing. We need to stop letting the bourgeoisie tell us who calls these folks and tells them Detroit, Michigan is ripe for the steal. Gatekeepers and boot liquors. And he goes on and on concerning why Hill Harper is obviously someone that he's not endorsing. And this was from an African-American. What say you, Lee? Hawkins.
Well, okay, so whoever wrote you that letter, first of all, they're trying to be the gatekeeper. Okay, so they're the one saying that he's not qualified and he shouldn't be able to run. The key is this. If I were someone who were a politician in Detroit and I had aspirations to be in the United States Senate and Hill Harper moved in town, I would be scared too. And I think that, this is a guy who has 2 Harvard graduate degrees. He's been at the highest echelons of Hollywood. He's done a lot of work on criminal justice reform. He's been in the community. He's been an activist. And what they're doing is just using that same strategy that was actually used effectively, if you can believe this, against Barack Obama when he ran against Bobby Rush, Congressman Bobby Rush in Chicago. Yes. They said he was an educated fool. They said he's not like us. He's from the Ivy League halls. And that was enough to get black people to vote against Barack Obama, who later would become the leader of the New World. But that's how deeply ingrained this self-hatred is.
Pulse of a new generation. PulseBeat.TV.
If you like what we're doing, please tell a friend. Or if you want to see what we've done again, go to PulseBeatGlobal.com. That's PULSEBEATGLOBAL.com. You can also go to our PulseBeat TV YouTube channel and you can revisit what we're doing. And once again, you can tell everybody that we're doing something that is so exciting that they wouldn't want to miss it. Remember PulseBeatGlobal.com or the YouTube channel PulseBeat TV. Thanks for telling the world about us.
Pulse of a new generation. PulseBeat.TV.
You're listening to the Greg Dunmore Vibe, and like I said, this is more than just a show. It's about a vibe, and adding to this vibe, making it exceptional, is the NABJ Award, multi-award winning Mr. Lee Hawkins calling from New York. And we've got a caller as well. So right before we bring in the caller, Lee, I cut you mid-sentence. So complete that thought, and then we're going to take a call.
Okay, great. So while I'm not here to endorse Hill Harper, but I am here to support his right, or any other black person's right, to participate in the political process by running for public office in Detroit. No matter what, if they qualify, they should be able to run. And it's scary to me that anyone, especially a black person, would suggest that he should not run or that he would not be electable because he's what they define as black elite, or because he's educated, or because he's famous, or because he's wealthy, and therefore he has not experienced enough struggle to be qualified to run and to represent a majority black district. That's crazy to me. In fact, it's eerily similar, Greg, to what a white supremacist would say.
Wow.
And that he's not a real black man because he didn't grow up in a housing project. His parents didn't struggle to put food on the table. That's romanticizing poverty, and poverty has nothing to do with black identity. You can be a person living in poverty who happens to be black, but poverty is not fundamental to the black experience.
I totally agree. And for the record, Hill Harper, he is a radio personality on this station as well on Saturday. So he's not officially in a race, but there are many people that want him to run for Senate, for U.S. Senate. So we'll see. But I always am about speaking truth to power, so I appreciate everything that you have said, Lee. We've got caller Rick on the line. Rick, how are you doing? And welcome to the Greg Dunmore Vibe with very special guest, Mr. Lee Hawkins. How are you doing, and what's your question?
Mr. Dunmore and Mr. Hawkins. Well, you caught my attention talking about, of course, Hill Harper and the senatorial race. And a lot of times, you know, I'm one of the bottom guys. I think sometimes we get a bad rap when we bring questions up, right, when we try to be stoic. In other words, it's not an issue. And I think Hill Harper is a great candidate, first off. Let me clear that up. But that's neither here nor there. The issue is that we don't have like a set criteria for a candidate. In other words, the candidate doesn't really have to say, I hear about housing issues from Mary Johnson, who's been collecting complaints about housing issues. Or I hear about workers' issues from Jimmy at, you know, this union or this group, you know, laying that stuff out, how you hear about people's problems. That's key, because what everybody is wanting from advocates and politicians is an organized response. So sometimes, you know, we make it look like a class struggle, and it's not a class struggle. And then it is. But it's not a struggle with the individual's class. It's a struggle with the way that the system, you know, picks candidates and funds candidates. We know candidates that come up from the bottom. If you can't get the money, if you don't know people with the money, if you don't know what issues you can champion to get the money, you know, those are problems. And if you don't have an already organized group, that's the problem. So in many ways, I guess money does, you know, pick our candidates. Now, some of the issues, I won't say some, one of the issues that have come up, and it should be addressed because it's a legitimate issue, and that is, what was Mr. Harper's relationship to, you know, this one person I've heard who had a complaint about Mr. Harper's handling of their issue and the Flint water issue. So we just break that down and we find out what it is, because a lot of times these things are misunderstandings and, you know, different interpretations.
But, you know, I appreciate the point that you're making, and Rick, I don't mean to cut you off, but we are kind of turning the wheel.
Sorry.
No. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and I don't know about the Flint crisis.
I know you got an entertainment show too, man.
Yeah, I know, but then again, you know, Hill Harper is an actor, and so we talked about him as well.
Yeah.
But
I caught on to that. Let me let that go. Thank you. May3.com.
Okay, thanks so much for calling in. You know what? He's still listening, so if you want to say something to him, Lee, say something to him. He's still listening.
I think that he raises some really good points. A lot of this really is about process, and I think when you break it down to the issues and not to the person and the background of the person, as if there is some kind of monolithic experience that we have as black people or as people in urban communities, If you just stick to the issues like you did, Rick, that's great. In terms of the Flint experience, I'm not up on that, but I will tell you this. Having lived in Detroit for 3 years, in close proximity to Flint, I know there was a lot of concern about it. One thing I notice about Detroiters, I love you, but you're very proud about your city, but also very defensive about it. And if there's a boarded up building, you'll put a facade on the storefront over it, and you'll say it's all good. But it's not all good. And there are many other cities that Detroiters compare themselves to that do not have thousands and thousands of vacant lots and boarded up buildings. And when you're an outsider and you come and you see that, you see the positive things, but then you say, what can be done to improve? There's good perspective in coming from the outside because you're not so close to the city that you actually can't take criticism and see what needs to be done to improve it. And there's that hamster on a wheel effect that happens when you're so ingrained in the city. And I think that that's part of it, too. I think that there are many people who have been part of the political machine in the process, Rick, as you pointed out, in Detroit, who are threatened by an outsider coming in.
Yes, and so
I think we need as many people sitting down at the table with diverse perspectives and lived experiences to actually help out. He may not know the lady on the corner, and I think that right now it seems like that's what he's trying to do.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that people sometimes hold people to a standard that might be unfair, and just because you live somewhere does not mean that you are thinking where you need to think. And I always said it's not always how you look, it's how you think.
My goal was to be a professional football player. That's what I wanted to do, right? And I got to Brown University. I ended up meeting so many people that were interested in art and politics, and I was wide open. And suddenly, this guy that just loved sports became fanatical about all these other things. A wonderful professor who has passed away now, he pulled me to the side one day and he said, listen, I think you're the most brilliant student I've ever had in my class, but you're underperforming. You're taking whatever place or whatever expectations people have of you as a black male for granted. Do you want to live a life where you just skate by? Or do you want to live a life of impact and legacy? I made a drastic shift. I decided that excellence in whatever I did was going to be my calling card.
Pulse of a new generation. PulseBeat.tv.